The U.S. stock market is in free fall right now. The Dow, it's worse than it was when we went to break. The Dow is now down 2.6%, S&P 500 down 2.7%, NASDAQ down 2.9%, Russell 2000 down 2.3%. Every single one of the 30 stocks in the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down. But what's more telling is the bond market. The bond market is going, the yield is going up. Now, it's not up by much right now, but it is increasing. Now, if you talk to any major investors in the world, not just the United States, you talk to Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, talk to Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, talk to Kevin Hassett, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. What they will tell you is that the bond market is more important than the stock market because the smart money and the smart brains look at and deal with the bonds. And when the yield goes up, that is a suggestion of future instability. The President of the United States is researching whether or not he can fire Jerome Powell because the European Central Bank has cut interest rates in Europe, and Jerome Powell and the Fed are refusing to cut interest rates in the United States. You have to understand the role of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is responsible for two things: maximize employment and minimize inflation. The goal of the Fed has always been to minimize inflation, but in the 1980s, their duty was added, and that is to maximize employment as well. The Federal Reserve chairman is considered independent. Now, this gets to the case Humphrey's executor. Back in the 1930s, the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission was ousted. Mr. Humphreys, he wound up dying. His executors continued the litigation to get his back pay, and the Supreme Court ruled that FDR was wrong to fire Mr. Humphreys because he was an independent person. And the rule for Humphrey's executor was that agencies that are independent, that do not work the partisan will of the president, Congress can create these independent bodies and restrict the president's ability to fire. John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, Sam Alito, and Clarence Thomas, that's 5 members of the Supreme Court, have gone on record wanting to revisit Humphrey's executor on the grounds that there are probably no more independent agencies left in Washington, D.C., so the president should be able to hire and fire at will. The one exception is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve chairman serves for a very long time, beyond the grasp of presidents to shake it up, and the president is restricted from hiring and firing. If Humphrey's executor is overturned, I would suspect the Supreme Court would probably carve out the Federal Reserve because the way the Federal Reserve works is independent from partisanship. When Janet Yellen was the chairman of the Federal Reserve, she was independent of Barack Obama. When Jerome Powell was chairman of the Federal Reserve, who, by the way, was nominated by Donald Trump, irrespective of what the President of the United States wanted, Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve raised and lowered interest rates. He raised interest rates on Joe Biden at a time Joe Biden did not want interest rates raised. He is not lowering them at a time that Donald Trump wants interest rates lowered, and here's why. You lower interest rates, you speed up the economy. The data to the Federal Reserve suggests that inflation is still a problem out there. Yes, it did better last month than it had done, but tariffs have an inflationary effect. In fact, there is news from CNBC today that a massive number of imports are being parked in tax-free foreign trade zones, hoping the United States cuts deals. There is also other news that the Japanese delegation showed up to Washington, D.C. to negotiate their deal with the White House and realized the people they were negotiating with had no power to actually give them the deal, and so they walked out of the meeting. The Japanese walking out of the meeting at a time the White House has suggested they could get a trade deal from a country and strongly hinted it was Japan was a warning sign. China has issued a trade warning today, saying that it would economically punish any country that tries to join the United States in a deal against China. That's rumbling the markets. But the biggest one is the instability that comes from potentially ousting Jerome Powell. And if the president can oust Jerome Powell at will, any Fed chairman can be ousted by any president for any reason, and that breeds instability. I can't emphasize this to you guys enough. It is not my intention to be a broken record. I'm not trying to just say something because I like or dislike someone. I'm just trying to tell you the God's honest truth of what's going on out there, and that is this. Businesses need stability. The smallest of small business owners in America needs stability. I had somebody email me the other day and say, this is BS. I'm an independent contractor. All you're talking about business stability is markets go up, the markets go down, the economy changes. You're not running a business. You're blogging. Spare me. If you're a small business and you are employing people, you've got to have some ability to project into the future what could happen. And when the president can hire and fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve at will, that means that the chairman of the Federal Reserve is beholden to a president who himself changes on a dime. Just think about it. We had tariffs, and the tariffs were going to be on electronics, and then they were going to exempt the tariffs on the electronics for Apple, and then they're saying those tariffs could come back, and then they were going to have tariffs on automobiles, and they rolled them back to a degree, and then they put them on, and then there were going to be reciprocal tariffs based on trade deficits, and that was pulled. You can't tell what the hell is going on because who knows what the president's going to do one day or the next, and what happens is market instability. Your small businesses and your large businesses need a level of stability. And that's one reason getting rid of the Fed chairman beyond his tenure in office is a problem, because when you do that, that adds more instability, and businesses have got to be able to plan. Let's just take my business. I have a handful of employees, 5 employees. My business is dependent on ad rates and radio stations. I'm sure there will be people calling angrily today suggesting that I was insulting their favorite politician. Please take me off the radio for having this discussion. My business is based on ad rates, based on ratings, based on the number of stations I get. Well, when there's economic instability and people are starting to worry about a recession, advertisers start to slow down not just their rate of payment, their bills, but also their rate of advertising. I have to be able to project into the future. What does it look like for me to be able to do a budget next year? Will I be able to give pay raises? Will I be able to hire more people? What will I need to cut if things don't work? I've got to have that stability in my little business. You're a mom and pop shop on Main Street. You can't diversify enough to get out of buying stuff from China. Now suddenly you have 125% tariff on stuff. Everything's become more expensive. Are you going to be able to hire? Are you going to have to fire? Are you going to go out of business? My daughter was here a little while ago. She said, have you heard about the makeup industry? No, I don't pay attention to the makeup industry. There have been a bunch over the last few years. There have been a bunch of independent businesses that do makeup, and they sell through the stores you're familiar with. And a number of those businesses are announcing that if things don't change within the next year, they're going to have to go out of business because they're having to raise the prices on the makeup, because where does that get manufactured? China. Probably shouldn't be buying makeup from China anyway, given the toxic chemicals they're probably putting in the makeup. But nonetheless, a lot of these independent companies doing this, their rates are going up. They're probably going to be wiped out. They got to be able to plan, though. What's going to happen? Every little bit of instability on the whims of today there are tariffs, tomorrow there aren't. Here's the rate today, here's the rate tomorrow. We don't know what the next day is going to be, adds that instability. You add in the hiring and firing at will of the Federal Reserve Chairman, who his open markets committee sets the rate of interest rates in the country, whether they're going to go up or whether they're going to go down, and tries to contain inflation. The whole reason Powell and the Fed isn't lowering interest rates right now is they're still worried about inflation. It is their number one rule. It is their number one duty. They're to maximize employment, but they have always been set up to deal with inflation. And there are Americans who say, but the Europeans just lowered rates. Yes, the Europeans just lowered rates because the tariffs in the United States are affecting trade in Europe. And the Europeans are in a worse position than us. Why? Because we lead the world. And as long as we lead the world, we're going to be in a better, more stable situation than the rest of the world. And there are a lot of businesses out there who are looking at what the administration is doing, thinking, I don't know that they want to still lead the world, and they don't understand what's going to happen If they abandon leadership of the world, our interest rates are going to go up, our inflation is going to go up, our exchange rate's going to go up, our costs are going to go up, our burdens are going to go up. They don't seem to have a clear economic vision, and yet there are people on the inside who say, actually, the president wants a recession. Yes, there are people on the inside who say the president wants a recession. I don't believe it, for the record. I don't believe it. I think the president really hates trade deficits. There are people on the inside who say a recession would be good because it would force the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, and it would put the country on a better economic footing to be able to deal with the debt and deficits by having lower interest rates produced by a recession. Kevin Hassett, however, is out there suggesting everything is fine. There will be no recession.
One would expect that once the deregulation really takes place and is sustained and the tax cuts are extended, that would be a positive for the economy. But it sounds to me that you're not expecting a recession this year.
No, I really am not. The first quarter's looking like it's going to be way better than people thought at the beginning of the quarter, way better than we expected because of what we inherited from Joe Biden. And it's because President Trump's policies are working faster than expected. And the way to think about it really is that what's going on is we need to onshore activity, create jobs in the U.S. And it used to be that was like a really, really slow-moving thing. But now with AI and supply chains and everything, it's a much less slow-moving thing.
Listen, Hassett is being a great encourager out there, but a lot of people don't believe him. You add in the instability on Trump's attacks on Powell, it just further causes problems out there. Right now, every market index is down and the bond yield is going up. And that suggests investors are really concerned about stability from Washington, D.C. It turns out from a big story that came out over the weekend, over Easter weekend, that last week, Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent, who, by the way, dislike each other greatly, together went to the White House on an unscheduled meeting when they found out Peter Navarro was not going to be there and convinced the president last week to pause the reciprocal tariffs. And that is what rebounded the markets. They're going to need to do something this week, including possibly getting the president to publicly say he has no intention of firing Jerome Powell, even if he wants Powell to lower interest rates. He may want the Fed to lower interest rates. The president has no power to compel it. They're playing with fire here. Y'all, I don't want the Democrats to come back into power. You disrupt people economically, people are going to turn on the president, even as they like what he did on immigration, even as they prefer him to the Democrats. You hurt them economically, they're going to turn on him. We can't afford for them to turn on him. We can't afford it because we need the president so very much to stay in power, to battle the wokes, to realign the country in ways that need to be realigned. And so we need good economic stewardship to make sure the Democrats don't surge back into power.